very fortunate this weekend to be in the company of an exceptional rabbi, our scholar in residence, Rabbi Dr. Elyse Goldstein. Rabbi Goldstein delivered a remarkable sermon this morning, and it will be on YouTube by Monday if you missed it. A beautiful commentary on what it means to both stand firmly in your place and also to reflect and move forward. Tonight, she has been tasked with returning us from the world to come of Shabbat to this world, the real world, the world of pain and suffering, the real world in which we live, and will be delivering the lecture prior to the Selihot service. Rabbi Goldstein is not a stranger to many of us, but for those who are not aware of her remarkable career, you should know that when she was ordained in 1983, she was the first and only woman serving as a rabbi in Canada and paved the way for future generations of female rabbis that now almost every liberal congregation in Toronto has had a female rabbi. Well, she was the one who shattered the, quote, stained glass ceiling for them. She was assistant rabbi at Holy Blossom, the founder of the City Shul in downtown Toronto. In addition to her congregational work, she founded Kollel, the Adult Center for Liberal Jewish Learning, and was the first woman to be elected president of the Toronto Board of Rabbis. You can learn from her through her award-winning books, Revisions, Seeing Torah Through a Feminist Lens, and the Women's Torah Commentary. Her journey is not just one of personal achievement, but also a breaking barriers in a male-dominated field, all while balancing a rich family life and now pursuing new passions. She is recently retired as of last summer. So it's an honor to welcome her again back to the pulpit, and her partner Baruch as well, who's been with us this weekend. And I hope you come back more. We like having you here. Not much to do in retirement, right? You can come visit.
Shavua Tov. I've had a wonderful experience at Beth Tikvah so far, and I'm so delighted to be with you again this evening. Let me begin with a quick word to the choir, because I know they have to leave early, and they've been very polite and lovely telling me that. And so I promise to only say important things in the first half hour, because that's when I'm preaching to the choir. But it is so meaningful for me to be here because of the following story. In 1983, I arrived in Toronto as a newly ordained Reform rabbi to be the assistant rabbi at Holy Blossom Temple. It was an earth-shattering experience to come to this town. I was born and raised in New York, and if you like, I can go back to my New York accent to prove it to you. But I was not prepared for the firestorms that would happen when I arrived in the 80s. The first 2 weeks that I came, I was invited by my conservative colleague, Rabbi Larry Troster of blessed memory, who was the assistant rabbi at a large conservative synagogue down the street from Holy Blossom, which doesn't have to be named. And he invited me to come and discuss the possibilities of us working together on some kind of joint program for Jewish singles. He was newly married at the time, and I was single, and he thought, what a nice thing for us to do as two young assistant rabbis down the block from each other. So I go to meet him at I go to meet him at his synagogue, I can say, Beth Tzedek. I go to meet him at Beth Tzedek, and we walk into the sanctuary. And as we approach the bima, he stops me. He says, "Oh, Elyse, I forgot. You're female." So even though you are my rabbinic colleague and I'm excited to do joint programming with you, I cannot invite you up to the bima to sit with me here and to see our Torahs. Rabbi Troster of blessed memory and I did start an amazing program called the Floating Singles Congregation, which met once a month at Holy Blossom and once a month at Beth Tzedek. When it was at Holy Blossom, Rabbi Troster and I would co-lead the service on the bima. And the months it was at Beth Tzedek, Rabbi Troster would lead from the bima and I from the floor. Now fast forward to a couple of years ago when my mother of blessed memory passed away and I was in the 11 months of mourning. I would go to the daily minyan back and forth between Holy Blossom and Beth Tzedek. And I was at the minyan at Beth Tzedek. Two things happened. The first is I was wearing tefillin, and the person behind me was whispering very loudly about the fact that I was wearing tefillin. And the person next to them leaned over and said, "Oh, it's okay. She's a rabbi." Which I guess meant I was an honorary man at that moment. And that reminded me of a story from when I was in Montreal with the great Orthodox feminist scholar Norma Joseph. Some of you know her name. And she tells the story as the first Orthodox woman to wear a talit in the Sephardic congregation in Montreal. People would lean over to each other and say, "That's the rabbi's wife." So it's kind of a she's crazy moment. That was the first moment at Beth Tzedek wearing my tefillin that I thought, how far the needle has moved. And the second moment was when Rabbi Friedman Cole, one of my really lovely colleagues, came over to me at the end of the 11 months and said, "Can we give you an aliyah this morning?" And I was in shock. I was rooted to my chair. I said, "Baruch, you can't do that. I'm a woman." And he said, "Oh, we have women do aliyot for years already. Where you been? Under what rock have you been hiding?" When I told these stories to Rabbi Grover, we were discussing what the topic would be tonight. And he said to me, "That's your topic." That's your topic. How is it that things are able to differ so much today, not only for women, but for everyone else? So this morning, I told you my personal journey to the Rabbinate, of how the rabbi I had growing up was determined that I would marry a rabbi and not be a rabbi. But I didn't tell you the two happy endings to that story. The first happy ending is, that was 1968. In 1983, at my ordination, the cantor who had been my teacher and supporter was in the front row at my ordination. The rabbi was not. And the second happy ending is when I joked this morning that at the bima I said, "Well, I'm not going to be the Rebbitzin. My husband can be the Rebbitzin." I didn't get a chance to tell you the famous female rabbi joke, maybe the only female rabbi joke. And that is, you call the wife of a rabbi a Rebbitzin, so what do you call the husband of a rabbi? Lucky. Now, when I decided to become a rabbi, I was only 13, and I really only wanted to do one thing, and that was to just be a rabbi. My intention was highly personal, totally individual. I didn't realize then that women becoming rabbis would actually shake the very foundations of Judaism. It would question every assumption we have of Jewish life that is based on patriarchal power. And it would challenge even what it means to be a Jew. Because no longer can a photo of a man in side curls and beard be the universal meme for Jew or for rabbi. No longer can a women in religion class suffice as an antidote to the general religion classes we've all been taking. And when my male colleagues are not called man rabbis, is that true, Rabbi Grover? Anybody ever say, "Oh, we have a man rabbi"? He's very good, you know. That's never happened. I have come to understand that pushing open the barriers for women in Judaism would eventually, as a consequence, push open the definitions of Jew for everyone. For 40 years, I have taught that there is no such thing as the neutral study of Judaism. So if you remember nothing else of what I say tonight, remember that. There is no such thing as a neutral way to look at Judaism. Every person brings to the study of Torah their own unique perspective, the received tradition of what they've learned before, their preconceived notions and assumptions about what the text means, and their societal connections which come from the community in which they find themselves. Personal and particular lenses are something we all wear when we approach anything. It's like the man who takes his wife to the eye doctor for a third visit in a row. Doc, he says, I don't get it. I've taken her to see you 3 times now. I've gotten her new eyeglasses each time. We tried contact lenses and even laser eye surgery, but I still can't get her to see things my way. And so, my job tonight, as your Selihot scholar, is to present to you the great themes of Selihot, the grand themes of sin and atonement and repentance and redemption through my own lens. And that is the lens of feminism. I'm going to try and get you to see things my way. So much has changed since my bat mitzvah day that I never could have imagined. And even more in the years since I got here in 1983. We, as a Toronto Jewish community, have experienced what is called a shapeshift, the ability for something to turn into something else. We have shapeshifted in the Jewish community and in all the movements, which would not ever have been possible without a concept I'd like to explore with you tonight, which is the concept of communal tshuva, of an entire organization, of an entire movement, of an entire community doing tshuva. I'd like to suggest to you that it's not that we have changed with the times, nor have we adapted, nor have we modernized, but rather we have experienced what I will call communal tshuva. The idea that not only individuals, but entire systems, institutions, congregations, movements can go through the same process of tshuva that we as individuals are expected to go through and come out different on the other side. Tonight, I'm not going to try and deal with the changes in the Hasidic world, but in the Orthodox world, not only, for example, have baby namings for girls and bat mitzvah become absolutely standard, but deeper than that, within its leadership, Orthodox rabbis are dealing in their own halachic and quiet way with the reality that they are gay and lesbian and trans Orthodox Jews, which in 1983 was an unthinkable discussion. The conservative movement here in Toronto has welcomed female rabbis to serve in pulpits, not only in education or as youth rabbis, but to serve as rabbis of pulpits. And it is working with intermarried couples, which in 1983 was unthinkable. And the Reform movement has done a major cheshbon hanefesh, an extraordinary inner reckoning with the Me Too revelations of sexual harassment of female rabbinical students in my seminary. Stories that are unthinkable even today, that caused so much emotional turmoil for us as young rabbinical students with a vision, with a goal, with an idea of serving the Jewish people, to be not only harassed, but in some cases abused by professors. Our seminary this year took the radical step of offering to reissue our smicha certificates with the offending professors' names taken off. Now that, in 1983, was unthinkable. Again, please hear me. I am not suggesting this is adapting to outside pressures or modern norms, but a process of purposeful, thoughtful, communal tshuva that leaves all of us as individuals and as members of these movements changed. So let's look at some texts, ponder some questions, and give some real-life examples of communal tshuva. In case you didn't say it this morning, I invite you to say the blessing for Torah study with me, which will elevate our discussion. It is la'asok b'divrei Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So first, let's remind ourselves of the steps of tshuva that we as individuals are supposed to go through, found in Rambam's Hilchot Tshuva, the Laws of Tshuva, chapter 2. Maimonides identifies 3 indispensable steps to the tshuva process. 1, regret. In his words, yitnachem al sha'avar, regret. 2, renounce, through an out loud verbal, or in some cases written, public confession. In his words, lihidvadot bisfatav, to make confession out loud. Regret, renounce, and 3, resolve, to leave the sin plus commit to not doing it again. In his words, she'azov hachoteh chet'o v'yigmor b'libo shelo ya'asehu od, to leave the sin behind and to strengthen your heart to never do it again. These 3 steps, regret, renounce, resolve, are crucial in leading us to repentance. All 3 are necessary, purposeful, and they make amazingly good psychological sense. Let's look at them and then layer them on communities. First, regret. Regret is not guilt, nor is it shame. Psychologist Bill Crawford explains it this way. Regret acknowledges that I made a mistake. Shame says that I am a mistake. Guilt is what others use to try and make me feel ashamed. Regret is culpability, in which we acknowledge to ourselves that not only did we do the thing that was hurtful, but that we are at fault, and we're hurt inside because of it. We are lessened. We are at loss of our truer self. It doesn't count, by the way, if it includes the words, they made me do it, she made me do it, he made me do it. Second, renounce. Renounce makes everything real. There is no escape. The truth is laid bare. This is not the childish, say you're sorry, without any inner work that not only provokes the apology, but also manifests a different behavior after the apology. As Rambam teaches in Hilchot Tshuva 2:3, the one who makes an oral confession without resolving to abandon the sin is compared to a person who immerses in the mikveh while holding a rodent in their hand. Sheretz biado. Renounce forces us to let go of the sheretz, the unclean reptile that we bring into the mikveh with us before we enter the purifying experience of tshuva. And third, resolve. While we can never undo our actions, we must create a situation that is as close as possible to the state of affairs that would have been had we not behaved badly. To harm someone is to incur a moral debt, writes Rabbi Louis Newman, and it must be repaid in the same currency. Resolve gets us to a new place. Now let's layer regret, renounce, resolve onto entire systems, onto movements, and onto communities. We start with one simple text that I think you all know. Al chet shechatanu. Ashamnu. The sin we have sinned. All the Al Chet prayers are in the plural. The rabbis ask, why is the Al Chet in the plural? After all, Yom Kippur is to atone for my sins between me and God, ben adam lamakom, and not between me and other people. That's what the 10 days are for. The answer the rabbis give is twofold. First, it's easy for me to look at that list of Al Chets, of all the sins, and your prayer book, by the way, has more than my prayer book has, so of that I'm sometimes grateful. It's easy for us to look at that list of Al Chets and say, well, I didn't do that one, or my kids certainly didn't do this one. But if the person behind me and the person in front of me actually did that sin and doesn't confess it, what good is the vidui, is the confessional? So we say the vidui, the confession, in the plural, each and every one of them, and each and every time, several times over the course of the high holidays, that we do it. To not let anyone opt out, which they could do easily if the vidui was in the singular. And the second, and this is much harder to deal with, is the rabbinic notion that when one Jew sins, it is as though all Jews have sinned. I remember my mom of blessed memory, if a criminal name appeared in the newspaper or on the TV, what did she do? First find out if he's Jewish, if he sounds Jewish, was he really Jewish maybe? Maybe he's only his father is Jewish, so he's half Jewish. She would say in no uncertain terms, this is not good for the Jews. And that is still so true today. The Talmud actually sets this out for us in discussing who should be punished for an entire community's sins. In the Gemara, in Masechet Shavuot 39a. V'chol averot shabat Torah mikol ha'olam lo, v'haketiv, u'cheshalo ish be'achiv, ish ba'avon achiv. Milamed, shekol Yisrael arevim, you know this, zeh bazeh. And with regard to all the transgressions in the Torah, is punishment not exacted from the entire world? Isn't it written, and they shall stumble one upon the other? This verse is homiletically interpreted to mean that the community stumbles spiritually because of one another, which teaches the principle the entire Jewish people are responsible one for the other. The plural al chet is the practice of public communal vulnerability and public communal responsibility. Even if I didn't do it, if the person in front of me did it, I take responsibility. The confessional prayers for the high holidays are constructed to intensify our feelings of responsibility for one another. This goes back to the Torah, to Vayikra 19:17, which instructs us to rebuke each other. Hochiach tochiach et amitecha, v'lo tisa alav chet. You should surely rebuke your fellow Jew, and you should not bear sin because of them. The Gemara expands upon this concept in Arachim 16b, discussing just how far can we rebuke another Jew. And it's incredible. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Ad Shahaka'a, Rabbi Yehoshua Omer, Ad Klala ben Azai Omer, Ad Nizifa. Rabbi Eliezer says, until his rebuke is met with a zetz, by hitting. Rabbi Yehoshua says, until his rebuke is met with cursing. And Ben Azai says, until his rebuke is met by scolding. Now, Rabbeinu Gershom, the 11th century Talmudist, and I'm happy to add the rabbi who banned both the practice of polygamy and divorce against a woman's will, comments on this verse, Ad sheyigar bo hamitocheach, until his rebuke is met with the rebuked one rebuking the rebuker. The Gemara in Baba Metzia 31 adds that you should rebuke someone 100 times. And this is the unexpected kicker to that Gemara. Listen carefully. You should rebuke someone 100 times, even if he is your Rav. Even if the person you're rebuking is your teacher, is your mentor, is a public figure you've always respected, is a politician, is a person in power. So, if we can rebuke in public strongly, and maybe even sometimes harshly, and if we can rebuke even those who hold high office, like a Rav, or an institutional head, or a donor, and if we take communal responsibility for the acts of all our fellow Jews, even those who hold high office, like a Rav or an institutional head or a donor, and if we don't say at the Al-Chet, well, I didn't do that one, then we all together have the foundation for the process of communal tshuva. This has to be followed by communal renouncing and communal resolve to change and improve and not return to the past behavior. I told you what is happening or what has happened recently in the reform movement about allegations and revelations of sexual harassment of female rabbinical students. What is happening right now in the conservative movement is also instructive and worth talking about. You may know or may not know that the two very well-respected deans of the Ziegler School have had allegations against them for creating a toxic environment which favors male students and is oppressive to female students. Those allegations were dismissed. That's important to know. However, they are still in the air. And if you know the story about taking feathers out of a pillow and trying to put them back in again after they've been released, you know that that will not be able to happen. And you know that other students will now come forward and give their own stories and allegations. What is the problem with what is going on is not so much that the allegations were disproven or were cleared, but the transparency around this process has been problematic. The reform movement, and I mean no judgment, no movement better than the other, but the reform movement published the findings of the commission tasked with listening and assessing the allegations. And Ziegler will not publish the report of the research into the investigation. And this has caused great consternation among female conservative rabbis. So much so, that possibly one of the greatest female rabbis of the conservative movement, Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg, who wrote maybe one of the most important books on tshuva of the last 10 years, has severed her relationship with the conservative movement. And I quote her words. She says the following: "What we want is transparency, accountability, and the prevention of future harm." What she's saying, in my words, is what we want is regret, renounce, resolve. Now, you can surely ask me at this point, but for what should an organization repent? How do we determine if an organization sins? What if they just do something I don't agree with, something that makes me uncomfortable? Do they have to repent from that? And how? Some of you may say, well, I get it, that sexually harassing students is completely wrong and should be repudiated. But what's the sin in not letting a woman go up to the bima? What's the sin in not allowing a gay Jewish couple to have an ofruf? What's the sin in continuing, for example, to sing the liturgical music of cantors and song leaders and charismatics who were serial womanizers? What's the sin of accepting donation money for a library, let's say, from a man who made that money off deceit? The Torah is clear. Leviticus 25:17. Velo tonu ish et amito. Do not wrong one another, but fear your God, for I, Adonai, am your God. On this verse, Rabbeinu Bachya from the 13th century comments. The ona'ah referred to in this verse is called ona'at divarim, hurting people with words. Examples are not to offer deliberately poor advice, irritating one's fellow, provoking another to become angry. That's Rashi. We have a statement in Baba Metzia 59 that all the gates are closed except the gate of ona'ah, that is, the supervision by a watchful eye of God if someone is guilty of oppressing someone in words. The Talmud teaches in Baba Metzia 58b, one who embarrasses another in public is as if that person shed blood. And of course, we can point to Hillel's adage in Shabbat 31a, that which is hateful to you, do not do to anyone else. This is the entire Torah. The rest is commentary. Go and learn it. What is hateful to you, do not do to another. This is the entire Torah. The rest is commentary. And doesn't Leviticus 19:18 command us to love our neighbor as ourselves? The most pointed answer to the communal sin is the causing of emotional distress is a sin. Jewish law is clear. Causing emotional distress is forbidden. The Talmud in Ketubot 62 tells this incredible story. Rav Ruchami would go away to learn Torah from Rava for extended periods of time. But he would always come home on the eve of Yom Kippur. One year when he was supposed to go home, he was so engrossed in his studies that he didn't realize that the time to leave had come. Meanwhile, his wife was waiting longingly in anticipation of his return. As the time passed, she kept on hoping that he would show up any second. When it got late and he still hadn't arrived, she was saddened, and one tear fell from her eye. At that moment, as Rav Rachumi was studying Torah on a raised level, the floor caved in under him, and he died. One tiny tear brings down a powerful and learned rabbi. One tiny tear. If all the Torah is that which is hateful to you, do not do to another. When a large Jewish federation or a synagogue or a Jewish day school hides and protects or even honors and lauds those who abuse their power, who mistreat others, who marginalize, who cause shame or fear or emotional distress or trauma, who will shed the one tiny tear that will cause us to regret, renounce, and resolve? I have spent most of my 41 years of my career calling attention to those who shed the one tiny tear. Call it a sin or call it misbehavior, justify it as merely sociological or not intended to hurt. This is where our questions for tonight will have to land. It is not easy. Because it is not just sexual impropriety we need to deal with in order to shapeshift into the kind of welcoming, inclusive community we all desire. It is systemic issues we will need to confront, which require regret, renounce, and resolve. And so I'm going to name them. First, systemic misogyny, the constant refusal in the Jewish community to take women seriously. Second, systemic racism, the constant marginalizing and tokenizing of Jews of color. And third, systemic homophobia, the constant invisibility of Jews who are gay and trans and non-binary. These experiences are not one-offs. They are not unusual. They manifest themselves in the ways we speak, in the examples we use, in the jokes we tell, in the tunes we sing, in the translations in our Sidurim and our Machzorim. We are Ashkenazic-centric. We assume all Jews know a little Yiddish and eat gefilte fish on Shabbat. We are heterosexual and in-married-centric, assuming all male Jews are married to female Jews. Institutionalized in the leadership we choose, in the textbooks we use in our Hebrew schools, in the commentaries in our pews. I don't know how many of you, because you live up here, went to Jewish comedy night at the Miles Nadell JCC. Was I the only one? Good, because the comedians were all white, male, heterosexual, and Ashkenazi. And the jokes all reflected that, a subtle but felt assumption about the way women and men are, about everyone in the audience being in a straight marriage or a relationship, about Jews never ever being poor or homeless. It felt like 1983 all over again. That's why I am so moved that the Reform movement hired a research team to investigate and then validate the many allegations against the seminary and some of its most revered professors, made by a cascading number of women who came forward. The Reform movement expressed public remorse in a letter sent by the seminary to all Reform rabbis, not just to the female ones. It gave interviews with the Jewish press and confessed to the misconduct which traumatized many female rabbinical students and went on for years, quietly, accepted behind the scenes. Powerful men just moved around quietly into new positions, much like the actions of people like Harvey Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein and Les Wexner. Powerful men using their power to terrorize those less powerful. Communal tshuva began that day. And that's why I'm so moved that the conservative movement has not only ordained women, but has moved beyond making them honorary men and begun to value their contribution not in spite of being female, but because of it. And the unbelievable fact that I have female conservative rabbinical colleagues here in Toronto. Communal tshuva has begun. And that's why I'm even so moved that the Orthodox movement now grapples with finding a way to make all Jews feel like they count. Communal tshuva has begun. And that's why I continue to share my stories from the Jewish community of Toronto I came into in the 1980s. Though to some it may feel like ancient history, to me it's as alive as my recent retirement in June. So 3 personal stories of communal tshuva to conclude. And I hope we will have some time to talk together afterwards. First story, 1985. The Jewish Theological Seminary has just ordained Amy Eilberg as the first female conservative rabbi. Now, Amy and I had actually been roommates in Jerusalem in 1977, when she was at Hebrew U and I was at Pardes. We often discussed late into the night whether or not she should just go into Hebrew Union College, the Reform Seminary, and get it done, get ordained, or whether I should wait it out and go to JTS, a better fit with my more traditional proclivities. Well, the decision was made one rainy Shabbat afternoon. Amy would go to JTS to take the program and study and push and wait until they would finally ordain her, and me to HUC to study and push and wait for more traditional outlooks and observance from my seminary. Fast forward. I am the assistant rabbi at Holy Blossom, and I have decided to write an article to the Canadian Jewish News of blessed memory to laud the conservative movement's decision to ordain my friend and colleague Amy Eilberg. I am sitting at a Toronto Board of Rabbis meeting where the board has just agreed to never, ever do Birkat HaMazon together again, so as not to have to count me in the Mazuman. When the older conservative rabbi who chairs the meetings begins each meeting with, "Gentlemen," and Elyse, and the topic turns to this article in the Canadian Jewish News lauding the decision. My senior conservative colleague makes the announcement that he is going to refute my article. He is my rabbinic colleague. And he does so, saying in his article, I will be the downfall of Jewish tradition, and that conservative female rabbis like Rabbi Eilberg will be the end of Judaism as we know it. Now that's true. It was the end of Judaism as we know it. A few months later, I'm invited by my dear friends who belong to a now defunct conservative synagogue to attend their daughter's bat mitzvah. They asked the rabbi if I can offer a blessing after she reads from the Torah. They are told that I can certainly offer blessing at the luncheon from the floor. Fast forward to 2024, and I'm invited by more than one conservative synagogue to teach, to preach, to co-officiate at weddings, and many b'nai mitzvah. What an amazing experience of communal tshuva. Second, true story. In 1984, it was the custom of an unnamed conservative synagogue to give the greatest honor of the year, the honor of holding the Torah on Kol Nidre, to the shul president. For the first time in its history, that shul had elected a female president and just could not figure out what to do. She was a woman of some renown in this community, by the way. They didn't know what to do about the honor because surely they couldn't invite the shul president up to the bima now to hold the Torah. So they decided to give the honor to her husband. She was livid, and she came to me, a Reform rabbi, because I was the only female rabbi in Canada, to get some perspective and advice. And here's the advice I gave her. Lysistrata. Lysistrata. Lysistrata is an ancient Greek comedy by Aristophanes. Sorry? Oh, yeah. Originally performed in Athens in 411 BCE. It's the story of how women went on a mission to end the Peloponnesian War by denying the men of the land any sex at all until the war was ended. Lysistrata persuades the women of the warring cities to withhold sex privileges from their husbands and lovers as a means of forcing a peace settlement. I told this fantastic, strong president of a synagogue that when the first strains of Kol Nidre are heard, the very first notes out of the cantor's mouth, all the women of the shul, young, old, down to the last one, get up and walk out. I told her I would help organize it. And then I would guarantee that she would hold the Torah the next year. Even better than that, the rabbi got word of the plan. And guess what? She got to hold the Torah that year. And every year since then, women have been invited to hold the Torah on Kol Nidre. Communal tshuva has been done. And last, when it was my turn to be elected president of the Toronto Board of Rabbis in 1995, it was a rotation, reform, conservative. I didn't deserve it. It wasn't something I earned. It was what happened at the Toronto Board of Rabbis, one-term reform, one-term conservative. It was clearly my turn. The day of the election came. I said to my reform and conservative colleagues, listen, if my becoming president of this organization will bring it down, I am happy to step aside. Nope, they insisted I run. Not out of feminist principle, but because nobody else wanted to be president of the Toronto Board of Rabbis. The moment of the election arrives, I will never forget this, and wouldn't you know it, at exactly the moment the ballot is called, the two Orthodox colleagues on the Toronto Board of Rabbis both have to go to the washroom. How is it possible? What a coincidence. Now, on the one hand, you could claim they did it to be rude, to walk out on the election that would vote a woman as president of this Board of Rabbis. On the other hand, you could say it was to be kind, because if they stayed, they would have had to have voted against me. And I won. And I served as the first female president of the Toronto Board of Rabbi, and it didn't get destroyed. And communal tshuva from the same organization that had debated in 1983 whether or not it could invite me to join fell under my leadership, 1995 to 1997. So you see, you don't get mad. You get even. These stories that I tell you prove, if you live long enough and hang around long enough, the ground underneath you will shift, and you are standing on new ground eventually, whether you want to or not. Growing up in the 1960s as I did, the notion of a female rabbi, a woman Israeli Supreme Court judge, or an Orthodox synagogue in Jerusalem where women read the Torah from their side of the mechitza were impossible to even think about. They were ridiculous scenarios. Since then, our liturgy has changed to include the matriarchs. We start singing songs of Miriam in summer camp. We learn Talmud from Orthodox female scholars. We've introduced the notion of female spirituality. We make feminine talitot. We redefine sexual politics. A quick excursion into feminine talitot. Several years ago, I was in Jerusalem, and I went past a very frum store, owned by very frum people, and in the window was a pink tallis. So I go in, of course, and I ask the chassid running the store, excuse me, that pink tallis in the window, who on earth would wear such a thing? And he looked at me and he said, why, a bas mitzvah girl, of course. In your community, not in mine. But the very fact that he could even imagine that is a shapeshift. We would feel empowered to create midrashim with biblical women, named and unnamed, to take on the traditional meaning of the mikveh, to reappropriate it, to reclaim and recast scores of different rituals while questioning the hierarchical nature of those rituals and of the community which seemed to own them. We would change the Israeli public to rethink the lines between religious and secular. We would bring the issues of childcare, wife abuse, violence against Jewish women, and power imbalances in the Jewish organizational world to the fore. It is true, everything has changed since women were ordained. And I want you to ponder with me even the smallest things, like the architecture of the synagogue, like the change table in the men's room, like the fact that this morning I look around and there are other crazy women wearing the talit. The world has changed so radically, so much so that I offered to Rabbi Grover the following possibility. When he stood up here this morning and his littlest came up and was kind of, potchkeying with him, and he was giving a very serious moment, I said to myself, and I'm sorry to claim it, but I have to, that would not have happened before there were female rabbis. Because female rabbis normatized, they made it normal to see kids next to the rabbi. I brought my babies up to the bima with me. I nursed my baby in the back of the sanctuary, not behind the wall, but in the back of the sanctuary. We made it normal to see these things, to think about these things. And I am willing to say, to give permission to our male colleagues to be the parents they want to be on the bima as well. So I'd like to end with the following analogy. To me, the idea of communal tshuva is about pushing an iceberg. You see, when you're pushing an iceberg, you cannot feel it moving. But after you push and push and push, if you stand on the shore many years later and you look and you see, you will see how far the iceberg has moved. But it is impossible to move an iceberg alone. It has to be done in movements, in organizations, and in communities. And only when communities practice this idea of tshuva, of the three things we need for tshuva, is it possible to push that iceberg. Now, tshuva is like that iceberg. It's very slow, and you don't feel its effects until long after. But the effects of communal tshuva that I have seen since 1983, like the effects of an individual who does tshuva, I think have literally changed the world. So I wish you Shana Tova, and I would love to hear from you some feedback. Thank you. We do have time to talk, don't we?
We do.
Great.
Yeah. I just want to make sure I'm near a mic so that the live stream can pick me up.
Thank you.
Do you get a sense, like I did, of the role Rabbi Goldstein played in the history of the Jewish community in this country? When I heard some of these stories, I'm a recent rabbi in this community, and when I heard some of these stories from decades back, I found it so eye-opening and informative and just inspiring. The distance that the community has come and the role Rabbi Goldstein played and the chutzpah that she needed to push things in the direction that she felt deep down in her kishkas things needed to go. I am blown away even more tonight, getting even more details about what those early years were like. And that's why I wanted you to share your story with us. It is a story of not just communal tshuva, but of the leadership that is necessary to push that tshuva in the right direction. And if I had any criticism of your talk, it's that you're way too humble with regards to the role you played in changing minds and hearts, which is not always easy and requires the human touch that you provided over your career. I would like to take some questions from you.
Before you do, though,
yes.
Hold on. I don't want to be overly humble, but I do have to give credit, and this is very important to me. So when I came to Holy Blossom in 1983, quick story, because these stories are so precious, and I don't want them to get lost. So in the old days, in the 80s, the senior rabbis of congregations looking for assistant rabbis would come to the seminary in New York, and you would have one interview after another in these tiny windowless rooms, right? And of course, all the senior rabbis then were male, and all of the female rabbinical students, we were terrified. First of all, the week before ordination, only the female students were called in by the dean to discuss what we should wear at interviews. The male students were not called in. And we were all told to wear black suits and shirts with little bow ties, basically so we would look like male rabbis. And so I'm doing the interviews in 1983, and I go one after the other, and one after the other, the senior rabbis ask me the same question. You're single, what will happen if you meet someone? And they can't ask that question anymore, it's illegal actually. Until Rabbi Dov Marmer of blessed memory from Holy Blossom Temple. Now, I was a New Yorker. I never even heard of Canada. You know, it's like, oh, my mother said, you're going to be living in an igloo. She also said, oh, no, you should interview for that with Rabbi Gunther Plaut. He's the man who wrote the Torah. Because he wrote the great commentary on the Torah, right? So I walk into the room with Rabbi Marmer. First senior rabbi to ask me about my rabbinic thesis. What did you write your thesis on and why? And then he has a very thick British accent. He was very imposing persona. And he said to me, now listen carefully. He said, I'm not going to be your father. I am going to be your colleague. Do not tell me about who you're dating, and do not bring him to anything. Just be a rabbi. And I was so shocked. I said, Rabbi Marmer, please hire me. Please hire me. Even if you don't like me, please hire me. And he did. And so I have to say that for the 3 years I was at Holy Blossom, 83 to 86, Dov Marmer was my champion. He could have made it very difficult for me. He was my champion when people would say things like, we don't want the woman rabbi to do our kids' bar mitzvah because we have Orthodox cousins and it'll make them really uncomfortable. Like sitting in Holy Blossom with an organ is not going to make them uncomfortable. Anyway, all right, let them be. I mean, if they even show up, that's a plus, right? And Rabbi Marmer would say, well, she is the rabbi on rotation that day, take it or leave it. And when I was, people would say, I don't want her to come to do the unveiling because it's very uncomfortable for us to have a woman in the cemetery and all this kind of stuff. He was absolutely, absolutely adamant that I am a rabbi among rabbis, take it or leave it. So I just have to, I know there are people in the audience who probably knew him. Yes. I just have to say that having that kind of a mentor, a senior rabbi, a male senior rabbi, as he got older, I used to visit him every year in Jerusalem, and I would say to him, don't you forget, Dov, I taught you everything you know. But, I also say, these are great stories. One more. I'm sitting on an airplane with Rabbi Gunther Plaut of blessed memory, great scholar, one of the greatest scholars ever. And I had just finished writing revisions, and I asked him, would he blurb the back, right? And he said, yes, he'd be honored. And then he said to me, Elyse, I'm going to tell you something I've never told anybody else. He said, if I were to write my commentary over again, I now realize there are no female voices in it. Mm. It's all from a male perspective, and I wish I had met you when I started the commentary. So things like that, I have to give credit to the men who also pushed their own envelopes, unlike some of my other colleagues who did not, who pushed their envelopes and just were so enamored of hearing how it's possible to change while still retaining, the fidelity to Jewish tradition. Wonderful. So I have to give them credit.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Rabbi gets the right to the first question.
Oh yes, absolutely.
The only privilege, and then I'll take a couple from the audience. This morning you talked about having a deep sense of mission from the time you were a bat mitzvah, that you wanted to be a rabbi, and then you came to the role with another deep sense of mission to change the rabbinate and their ideas about what it meant to be a rabbi and the role that gender plays in those ideas. Today, all the schools seem to be suffering from what they call the pipeline crisis. There are very few candidates who want to be rabbis anymore in all of the seminaries. I wonder if you have any thoughts on why so few candidates are applying to rabbinical schools across the denominational spectrum.
Oh, such a good question. First of all, my parents never said to me, that's not a job for a nice Jewish girl. So I was very lucky. And as I said before, my mother really should have been a rabbi and could have been a rabbi had she been born at a different time. And I said to my husband this evening, I probably would have been a conservative rabbi had I been born later, by the time the conservative movement had, done all of these changes. The Reform Seminary just closed one of its campuses and has made decisions that are very problematic for some of us. I'm not going to go into that, it's too political, but about which kind of students they will allow to come into the rabbinate. I think that the rabbinate as a valued profession has undergone a huge change. And one of the problems is, as congregations need their rabbis to be cantors and counselors and CEOs and administrators and all of that, it's lessened our ability to be great teachers, right? When I started City Shul 13 years ago, I don't want to give you any ideas, Rabbi Grover, but I had one, Rivka remembers this, one hard and fast rule, excuse me, I don't mean to offend anybody, no ritual committee. No ritual committee. Unless you go to rabbinical school, then you can be on the ritual committee. Because I went to seminary for 5 years to decide whether or not we do X, Y, or Z, whether it's proper to do A, B, and C, and you didn't. And so that's my job. And I think that too many young people look at their own rabbis and see that they're overworked, underpaid, exhausted, and have to spend inordinate amounts of hours worrying about what color the napkins are, or how many chairs to put out, or whether or not, we do Havdalah at 7:34 or 7:35, rather than teaching Talmud and teaching Halakha and teaching Musar and teaching those great Jewish texts. I think young people are looking at their own rabbis and hoping that they can change the rabbinate too. Also, let's be honest, it is almost impossible to not be a global Jew today, right, with the internet. So young people are looking at synagogues and they're not cool, they're not, they'd rather be in a coffee house or whatever. So the young rabbis that I know, the young people being ordained as rabbis, are trying to take Judaism out to the street. They want to do social action, they want to change the world, and they're afraid that by being in a pulpit they can't do that. They're radically wrong. The best place to change the world is on the pulpit, right? Listen to all these people listening to me, and I'm able to convince maybe one or two of them to see things my way. It's radical. So I think that, first of all, the rabbinate has to be better paid. Sorry, I'm just putting it all out there. It has to be a better paid profession. It has to, listen, in Canada, we're so lucky that we get parental leave. I know my daughter-in-law is a newly ordained rabbi, so I'm very proud, thank you. My kids didn't become rabbis, they just married them, which is great. They went into their father's business of marrying a rabbi. But I'm watching her and what it means to be a young rabbi trying to change the world in an institution that wants it to just be the same way it's always been, right? And so institutions have to also be very flexible when they take in young rabbis. Gender today is a very different issue than it was in '83 when I was ordained. When I was ordained, it was binary. You were a male rabbi or a female rabbi, right? And so the female rabbis had to deal with being rabbis. Now, there are non-binary rabbis, there are trans rabbis, and so communities have to be ready for that. Now, you can't be ready for that if your prayer book still, excuse me, no offense, but if your prayer book still uses male God language only, right? And if your prayer book only uses male language for people, like mankind, how can you imagine, how can a non-binary person imagine themselves in that siddur or in that machzor? So there's a lot of challenges ahead. I think those seminaries are making, really painful decisions, including online classes and online ordination. To me, the rabbinate is still the greatest honor in the world. You know, I wear the title every day with so much pride, and I wish that young people would look at it and see it as a very powerful position to change the world. There's another theory. The other theory is once women get into a profession, it lowers the value of the profession, like women as doctors and things like that. Which is interesting because as men became nurses, it didn't lower the value of nursing professions, right? And that is true. There's no question about that. So then you ask yourself the ethical question, so should we keep women from that so it doesn't devalue it, or should we just up the value of it as soon as women come in? So there's no question the rabbinate also was devalued as women came in. And now everybody's all uptight about how many female rabbis there are. 50% of the school is female. Well, 50% of the world is female, so kind of makes sense.
Okay. Any questions from?
Please talk to me. Please.
Questions or thoughts?
I'm not worried. You can ask me anything. Yoav.
So in serving on rabbinical...
I'm just going to repeat the question here for the benefit of those listening online.
So in serving on rabbinical search committees, as I have, I once had a member of the congregation walk up to our meeting before it started, a female member, and said, promise me one thing, you won't hire a female rabbi. So my question to you is, have you seen as much pushback from women as you have from men?
The question is there in your career, have you seen as much pushback on the notion of women as Jewish leaders from women as much as from men?
So here's my answer. Feminist critique of the queen bee theory is really important for us to know. So feminist scholars question whether there ever was a queen bee theory, that one woman doesn't want to let another woman succeed. And they actually posit that that theory is a patriarchal theory to keep women from helping each other succeed, right? I'm going to be 100% honest with you. My greatest support has come from women. Oh my gosh. Even today at the Kiddush, so many women came up to me to say they felt my words, in their hearts. Their daughters, they wanted their daughters to hear and their granddaughters to hear. And I spoke with some women about wearing talitot and tefillin and why more women might not do that. I offered to come and teach about the halakha of women wearing talitot and tefillin and stuff like that. And so many women came up to me and said, I really heard you. So I think it's a myth, and I think it's a myth that's been used to hurt women, keep women from helping each other. And it's also a patriarchal myth in the following way. If those in power promulgate this queen bee theory, then they are making it frightening for women to move up, right? Because if there's only room for one woman on top, then I better be her, right? But once you stop counting, once you say, we're going to hire the best candidate for the job, okay, then there's no more fear of competition, which there was when I was here, right? So when I came in '83, people would say things like, well, we can't have a female cantor, we also have a female rabbi. And I would say to them, gosh, growing up, I had a male rabbi and a male cantor, and I survived that, Oh, then we can't also have a female president of the shul. 3 women on the bima, and I'm like, for 5,000 years, 3 women on the bima, that would be fabulous. I want the optics to be changed for our granddaughters, right? When our granddaughters look up on the bima, what do they see? I want them to see themselves. So the queen bee theory is there's only room for one woman on the bima. And we have to reject that theory. And it's true, people are afraid of change. People are afraid that a woman rabbi will mean that they have to look at their own lives, right? And ask questions about their own lives. And it's scary. Thank you. Great question. Okay.
My sincere
thanks.
thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.